Well, let's go straight to the big story from the aviation sector. Last evening, the government relaxed foreign direct investment rules in a few sectors, and the most significant decision was regarding Air India. In its bid to find a buyer for the debt-ridden national carrier, the government opened the doors to foreign carriers to buy a piece of Air India. Earlier, foreign carriers were not allowed to own any shares of Air India. Now they can own up to 49% and obtain the government's approval to do so. Foreign carriers cannot invest anything more than 49%, so the other party, 51%, must be owned by an Indian entity which will also retain effective control of the airline. The decision has been welcomed by foreign airlines as well as aviation experts. However, the opposition has criticized the move. The Congress has called it a deviation from the existing policy for national carrier. Left parties have slammed the government, saying it is moving towards handing over Air India to a foreign airline. Well, to discuss all of that and more, joining us now, live and exclusive, is the Minister of State for Civil Aviation, Jayant Sinha, in his first interview post the decision taken by the Cabinet. Mr. Sinha, I appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. I have many questions for you, sir, so let me get straight to it. Is the government going to divest 100% of the airline? You have now, by way of that Cabinet approval, allowed foreign direct investment up to 49%, but ownership and control 51% with an Indian entity. Is the government going to divest 100% stake? Will it be full privatization or not?
It will definitely be a strategic disinvestment, Shereen. The exact sale in terms of the share that will be offered as part of the disinvestment process and the stake that will be held by the government will be decided by the alternative mechanism that's headed up by the Honorable Finance Minister. But it is a strategic disinvestment, which means more than 51% will certainly be offered.
Okay, more than 51% will certainly be offered, but I would imagine that a final call, while it will be taken by the group of ministers on Air India headed by the Finance Minister, the thinking at this point, sir, you've had several meetings already. I'm not asking you to give us a sense of what the decision will finally be, but what is the thinking in terms of the government holding on to some residual stake?
I mean, there are various considerations that obviously come into play, Shereen, and you've seen that in the FTI decision as well, which is that we want this decision to continue to ensure that Air India remains an Indian carrier, that it remains a domestic carrier. It is controlled by Indian nationals and it retains its Indian ethos and character. And so all of that will be taken into account when the decision is made, first with respect to how much will be disinvested during the sale process, and secondly, how much of it will be offered for FDI. It can be up to 49%, but those are the decisions that the alternative mechanism will be making with respect to what we will be offering up to bidders as part of the disinvestment process.
Mr. Sinha, at 49%, do you believe that there will be enough foreign takers? Because I would imagine that a foreign investor may perhaps look at wanting control. You very categorically stated that you would like control to rest with an Indian entity. But at 49%, do you believe that that will be enough to woo a foreign investor for Air India?
We want this to be an Indian carrier. That's very, very clear. And Shereen, that is in fact the practice around the world. When you look at what the foreign ownership caps are for carriers around the world, you'll find that in almost every case, they are 49% or below 49%. And then the typical air services agreement that is signed for bilateral rights also is intended to ensure that substantial ownership and effective control stays with nationals of that country. So effectively, you know, the carrier, to be able to take advantage of the bilateral rights, has to be controlled by Indian nationals. And that, in fact, is in practice and in reality what you find when you look at the ownership of airlines around the world. In almost every case, as I've said, ownership is 49% or below for foreign nationals compared to Indian nationals.
Yes, you're right about that, sir. But let me also ask you about one of the other considerations. You've got one unsolicited offer, and that's coming from India's Indigo Airlines, sir. And there, very clearly, Indigo had stated that they would be up for the international operations as well as Air India Express. What is the thinking at this point in time in terms of either offering a single integrated network or, in fact, splitting up domestic operations and international operations?
There, I think we are quite clear, which is that we want to offer a single integrated network that includes both the international operations as well as the domestic operations. That is what will maximize the competitive position of Air India going forward, and that's really what I think we will offer as part of the sale process.
So you're very categorically stating that there will be no piecemeal sale of Air India. The domestic and the international operations will be on offer for sale together.
That is correct, Shereen. Of course, as far as the subsidiaries are concerned, we are going to be unbundling the subsidiaries, whether it's ground handling, whether it's the engineering business, the MRO business, Alliance Air. Those subsidiaries will be unbundled. You can bid for them separately, or you can bid for them in conjunction with your bid for the airline. So we will be offering quite a bit of flexibility as part of the bidding process when it comes to the subsidiaries. But when it comes to the network between the international and the domestic, as I said earlier, we want to put it out for bid as an integrated network.
So where would that leave then the unsolicited offer that Indigo has made, sir? And has there been any further communication with Indigo Airline? Because that was their stated interest. And also, I would imagine that they would run into a competition commission hurdle if Air India were not to be sold piecemeal, because on the domestic side, then Indigo's market share would go beyond the competition threshold, sir. So where does this then leave Indigo's interest in Air India?
Shereen, I really cannot comment on any of that kind of speculation. We have a very fair, transparent process, and we will have to see how the process unfolds and who places in what bids. But our process is set up in a very rigorous way in which the transaction advisor runs and operates the entire process. And we will just have to see how that unfolds. We really cannot speculate as to who's going to do what at this stage.
Sure. May I ask you, sir, because as I pointed out, Indigo is the one unsolicited offer that you have informally, whether it's Singapore Airlines or the Tatas. They have said that they will definitely, and that was in my interview, Mr. Chandrasekharan saying that they will definitely look at the offer when it hits the market. Have you heard informally from any other players, Indian as well as foreign, on their interest in Air India?
Shereen, what I hear is what is out in the media, so that's all I can comment on, and you're probably better informed about it than I am. As I said, we've got a very rigorous, transparent process where everything is above board, everything is clear in front of everyone, and that's how a process like this should be operated, and that's exactly how we are operating the process.
Let me then ask you about one of the other challenges, sir, and that is cleaning up the balance sheet. And that, I would imagine, would be something that investors will want clarification and clarity on. What is the thinking at this point in time, sir, in terms of being able to clean up the balance sheet before the sale?
So there are two very important criteria, Shereen, that we are following as we think through the balance sheet issues. The first criteria is that we are separating core and non-core assets. So for each of the subsidiaries, as well as for Air India, we are working through what are the core operational assets that go with the entity that is actually performing these functions. So whether it's running an airline or whether it's operating the MRO business, what are the core assets, operational assets that go with that business? So that's one criteria, and we are separating out core from non-core. The non-core assets, the real estate, the art and the artifacts, things of that sort are going into the SPV. So that's where the non-core assets are going. Then the second important criteria that we are using is the criteria of sustainability. So we don't want to saddle Air India or any of its subsidiaries with a level of debt that is not sustainable given their operations after you run them efficiently and so on. And so once we apply those two criteria, which is again a very objective and thorough way at looking at this, we can then arrive at what is the debt that goes with Air India and its subsidiaries, attributable sustainable debt, which are linked to the core assets, and what should then belong into the SPV, which will absorb all the remainder of the debt. So that's the process that we are going through right now. Obviously, that process will have to be approved by the alternative mechanism. And then once that is approved by the alternative mechanism and we have clarity on how much debt goes where, then it will be given out as information as part of the expression of interest. And then bidders will have a chance to go through that and clarify for themselves exactly how much debt is there and how to value and think about that debt.
So one of the other issues that I would imagine investors will want clarity on is the flexibility that they will have when it comes to employees, the number of employees, the commercial considerations along with the employees, productivity and so on and so forth. What is the thinking on that front?
We are going to make every effort to protect employees and ensure that they have ample provision for their career prospects and for their future. So obviously we're going to make every effort to protect employees. The good news, of course, is that Air India has a very balanced set of employees. They're very thoughtful about these matters. The other very good news is that over time, Air India has been, kind of right-sizing its employment profile, ensuring the right mix between permanent employees, casual employees, contract employees. So we actually are in quite good shape as far as the employees are concerned. And as I said, as far as the employee package is concerned, we are going to make every effort to protect that. And that also is being worked out right now and will also be evaluated and then approved by the alternative mechanism.
Would a VRS, for instance, be a possibility, sir, ahead of the sale?
I don't want to get into any of those details right now. Of course, in the expression of interest, when that is finalized towards the end of January, those details will be provided.
Okay, so you're saying the expression of interest will be finalized by the end of January. What is the broad timeline that you're working with, sir, by when you expect, forward movement in terms of being able to invite bids, etc.?
So we are hoping to have the expression of interest out by the end of January. So certainly by the end of January or a week or two thereafter, we will have the expression of interest. Once the expression of interest is out there and the data room is set up, then the bidders can go through the data room. They can collect all of the information that they want. They can assess and evaluate, all of the materials that are there. And then we will ask them for their expression of interest and we will apply the criteria that we have for shortlisting the bidders. And that hopefully should be done within 60 to 90 days of the expression of interest. And after that, then the whole bidding process will start in serious, ways. The thinking, of course, is that we will be able to award this to a winning bidder, hopefully in 6 to 8 months from now. And then, of course, the closing process will start, where we will, of course, have to get all the legal approvals, the security approvals, competition of commission approvals, which will take another few months. So our roadmap is that by the end of 2018, we should be able to close this transaction and transfer the assets to the winning bidder. So that's essentially the timeline that we are following.
By the end of 2018, you should be able to transfer the assets to the new buyer. Mr. Sinha, I know you've got limited time, sir, so let me very quickly ask you, because there was, my understanding is that there was the thinking that it could perhaps even take the form of a joint venture where the government would hold a certain amount of stake and you could perhaps get business houses of Indian origin to come together to bid for Air India. Is that still part of the thinking within the government, sir? Or is that just way too complex and complicated?
No, we'll have to see how people decide to bid for this, given the criteria that we set up and given the constraints that are included as part of the EOI. But once that is established as part of this very transparent process, then the bidders are going to have to decide what configurations work for them with respect to bidding on Air India. So let's wait and see how the process unfolds. We really cannot speculate about that right now.
Fair point. So you just spoke of some of the constraints that the expression of interest will clarify on. What would be the constraints? One would imagine that 49%, that's the constraint on the foreign investor. But what could some of the other constraints be that bidders will have to consider?
Well, one constraint, of course, is going to be the manner in which we set up the employee package. And so that, of course, is something that, bidder may view as a constraint. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it could well be, what the government stake will remain as part of the disinvestment process. So that's another aspect of the overall transaction. So these are, from a bidder perspective, these are the constraints, or these are the parameters within which they will have to operate.
You don't believe, sir, that if the government were to hold on to residual stake, and you're not confirming to us whether that is indeed going to be the case, but that would in fact be a deterrent for a commercial investor, the fact that the government will continue to hold on to a stake?
Let's wait and see how all these parameters are specified in the expression of interest. And again, as I said, we are in the middle of that process right now, Shereen, so I really cannot discuss those details. We are in the process of evaluating all these various alternatives and putting it up as a recommendation to the alternative mechanism, and then they'll take a call on it. But that's where we are in the process right now.
Are you worried at all, sir, about the politics surrounding the sale of Air India? We've got that parliamentary panel report to contend with. The opposition is raising concerns on it. Are you at all concerned that the political sensitivity may in fact cause any delays with this sale process?
I think we have a tremendous amount of support for this disinvestment. And let me correct you on the parliamentary panel. All that has happened so far is that there is a draft report that is circulating in the media right now. No report from that parliamentary panel has yet been issued. And that discussion is scheduled for January 15th, where the report will in fact be discussed. So there is no report that's gone out from the parliamentary panel. I've heard this quote-unquote fake news, if you will, in the media, but that is not correct. The report has not yet been issued and the discussion has not yet happened. So let's wait and see what actually happens in the parliamentary panel. And I think as far as the public response to this disinvestment is concerned, it has been uniformly positive. Everybody wants a strong global airline. Everybody wants a very successful Air India. And that's what we will get through the disinvestment process. And of course, at the same time, everybody recognizes that government resources, taxpayer monies, taxpayer funds, which all of us as taxpayers are paying, are much better used for public goods like healthcare, like education, like vital infrastructure, rather than on private goods like airline travel. We have 86% of our airline industry in the private sector. It's being extremely successful in terms of connecting and offering low fares. And so if we have Air India with the private sector, it will be a very good outcome for this country, as we've seen in telecom and many other sectors. When the sector has been opened up, deregulated, and when the private sector really is operating that sector, we get much, much better outcomes for the people of India, and which is why the people are on our side as far as this disinvestment is concerned.
And you're hoping that parliamentarians will be on your side as well. Sir, since we're talking about Air India, I just want to bring to your notice what's transpiring in a court in London where the Malia matter is being heard.
Parliamentarians are on our side,
said that Air India are on your side. Vijay Malia's defense saying, sir, that Air India was in greater debt but was not pursued over its debt. That's part of the argument that the Malia defense team is making in that London court. Mr. Sinha, a quick word from you on that.
Well, there are many failures during the UPA time. Of course, the sad state that Air India was in when we came into power in 2014 is a reflection of the many failures of the UPA government. Of course, we've been able to turn around Air India, and we've got it in a position right now where we can do a strategic disinvestment and convert it into the great global airline operating great global hubs, which is what India needs for its future, which is what New India needs. That's what we're doing through this disinvestment process, which is why the people of India are with us and supporting us with this whole process underway.
All right, Mr. Sinha, and you believe that you will be able to get the Air India sale done by the end of calendar year 2018?
Absolutely, that is the timeline we are working towards, and we are confident that we will be able to achieve that.
Mr. Sinha, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 and sharing with us whatever you possibly can, given the fact that this process is still under discussion at the group of ministers. Appreciate your candor. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. That's the Minister of State for Civil Aviation there, a day after the Cabinet cleared 49% foreign direct investment into Air India, paving the way for its strategic disinvestment. Still no clarity on whether the government is going to retain any stake or not. That card he's held close to his chest.